Wow. Growing up, I did a lot of theater and acting, and they say that public speaking is supposed to help people. I don't think it prepares you for being in front of a room of really awesome piano teachers. So what I'm talking about today is improvisation. And first of all, today's presentation is going to involve some of you. And it's also, I want to introduce you to somebody, my lovely 8-year-old student, Winston. So he's going to be helping me out. I'm going to ask some volunteers later to perform with Winston. So improvisation. I want to start off by just covering what improvisation is and what it isn't, because this is actually a very important point. Oftentimes when someone looks at, let's say, at a jazz player performing, and they hear them do something like this. When somebody hears a jazz player perform, they say, wow, did you just make that up on the spot? And it's sort of an interesting question because the real answer is no. So this is the thing about improvisation, about what improvisation really is that improvisation is a language. So when I talk to you right now, I'm using words that I've learned before and phrases that I've learned before, and improvisation is very, very similar in that improvisation is a vocabulary and a language that you learn to speak and become comfortable with. If I were to tell you to go to France and speak French, you've never spoken French before, I'm sure all of you would be like, what do you mean? How can I do that? That's sort of a similar situation when you have a student who wants to learn how to improvise, and you want them to do block key improv, and you say, okay, just improvise for me on the block keys, and then they freeze. I'm sure we've all been there before when someone asks us just to make up something on the piano, and then we say, what do you mean just make up something on the piano? And then we freeze, so we don't know what to do.
Turn the sound up a little.
And speak up a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, so whenever we are asked to improvise on the spot, we freeze because we don't know what to do there on the spot. And the solution to this is learning the vocabulary and learning the language. And so what this presentation is about is both two different perspectives, the teacher perspective and the student perspective. The teacher perspective is how we can become comfortable accompanying our students with different vocabulary as they become competent improvisers. And the student perspective is how the student becomes comfortable with the vocabulary. So I'm going to bring up Winston, and we're going to show you a couple of things. First, what I'm going to show you is how I like to start off students with improvisation, and that is just with one note. Just one note. That's all I start them out with, just one note. I'm going to show you what that sounds like. Keep going, you're doing a good job. So I start them off with one note, and in my right hand, I come up with a chord vamp that goes along with what they're doing. Ready? Now, a different rhythm. For a second. So in your right hand, when a student is starting off with what I like to call the OneNote Jam, what I like to do is on the drum is I like to try to figure out different rhythms with the student that they become comfortable with. We do quarter notes, half notes, we do various different rhythms, And then I like to reproduce it on the OneNote. He's done it many, many times before. And then in the right hand, you can do simple comping rhythms. That's a D minor chord, and he's playing a D in the left hand. Or you can go between D minor and a C. Try it. Okay. Now this, last time I did this with him in a lesson, when he used two hands, he had a really good time. Can you use two hands now and play it like a drum? So, just one note. I just start them off with one note. And what I like to do is have them come up with their own different variations, come up with their own different rhythms. And in the right hand, I like to come up with my own different comping rhythms to go along with the student. So now I need a volunteer who wants to try to play with Winston. I'm gonna help you. Anyone? Well. I want you to stay on the D note, Winston, down here. And what you're going to do is you're just going to do D minor as quarter notes, okay? Okay, Winston, you start. Go ahead. Now go back between D minor and C. Right? 1, 2, here we go. Okay, now try to arpeggiate it. Okay, 1, 2, here we go. Okay, thank you very much. That was awesome. So, OneNote Jam. It all starts with one note. The thing about improvisation is that when I start with kids learning improv, the most important thing with improv and kids is that I want them to feel empowered. I want them to feel like they can create. I want them to feel like they are totally in control and that they can play right away. And that's why I like starting with what I like to call the OneNote Jam, is because it gets them playing immediately. I've done this with as young as a 4-year-old student, and they just play the one note and they play lots of different rhythms, and we just have a blast jamming and doing different rhythms. Do you mind staying up here while I do what? Can you stay there while I stay here, and I'm going to do something else with you, okay? Good. So that's the OneNote Jam. The other thing I like to do with students, young students, when we move past this, is the very interesting thing about improv is the fact that, again, it's a language. So in order to start giving kids the language, I do a lot of call and response work. So when it comes to call and response work, I like to give them lots of phrases, lots of different concepts for them to do and for them to conceptualize. Can you guys switch spots? Let's switch spots. Can you guys hear me? I feel like am I talking into the mic okay? All right. Okay, so it's interesting that you chose to come up because I'm going to tie this into your presentation earlier. Earlier we heard a very awesome presentation on Chinese music, and what I noticed is that over and over again what came up was the pentatonic. And the reason that that's important and relevant is because not only, as we saw, is it very relevant in composition, but the pentatonic is very relevant in improvisation. So aside from doing the OneNote Jam, what I like to do with kids is get them right on the black keys. And And the reason that the black keys is very, very powerful is because it's the pentatonic. So starting on G flat, it's a G flat major pentatonic, and then parallel is a minor pentatonic. What I like to call the black keys is I like to call it, or call them, the training wheels of improvisation. And the reason I call it that is because when you have a student on the black keys, it's very empowering because it's almost impossible for them to make mistakes. When you have a student improvising on the black keys, they're limited to just the pentatonic, and it allows them the ability to create and make their own phrases and make their own sounds without being inhibited by the fact that oh, maybe I did a wrong note, maybe I played the wrong idea, and they simply create. And that's why the black keys are very powerful. And that's why I kind of like to call it the training wheels of improvisation, and that's why I start kids on that right away. There's an exercise I like to do in the very first lesson with kids, a call and response exercise. I'm going to lean over you to do this, but let me just show this. So this call and response exercise I do on the black keys with kids, and it's a blues exercise. You can find a similar exercise as this in current piano supply release, which I believe is being redone next year on call and response. But this exercise gets kids playing right away with one finger, which is, if you follow piano supply work, is important when it comes to arm weight and learning technique. So this gets kids playing right away. So I'll show you what that looks like. So the call and response exercise, the reason it's important is because, first of all, it gets kids playing. Secondly, it starts giving them their own sense of vocabulary. So now, Winston, why don't you try to do it on your own? So to start doing this, if you yourself are a classical player and you're not used to improvising yourself, I'm going to give you a couple little language things to get going right away, and I'm going to have her play it for you. So this sort of boogie-woogie blues pattern in the left hand can be simplified to not having to hit all the blues changes, which are 1, 4, 1, 4-1 are the blues changes, but the reality is that when it comes to black key work, you don't really have to hit all those. You can simply just stay on the 1. And what that sounds like is this. So that's G flat and D flat and G flat and E, just back and forth, just a little ostinato. Can you play it again? Now Winston, you play over her. Go ahead. Black keys. Okay, cool, thanks. Nice job. So when it comes to black key work, the pentatonic is important because sort of, again, it's like the training wheels. The interesting thing about the black key pentatonic is that if you started on E flat and do the minor pentatonic, and then you add the note A, it's the blues scale. Now this is very, very cool. Us jazz nerds love this. Because the fact that a young kid can simply start playing the blues scale within like the first 3 lessons by simply playing black keys with the note A is very empowering. So now let's try to do the same thing. You play the same thing again. And Winston, play black keys with the note A. Can we try that, Winston, real fast? Play the black keys with the note A. Nice. So, all right. You try in the left hand, and now you play the blues scale. So we'll do the blues ideas. 1, 2, here we go. Good. Now do it. Now do it going down. Try to do it going down. Go ahead. 1, 2, here we go. Do it again. Okay. Thanks so much for coming up. I want to do a different volunteer. Something else. That's a chance to play. Anyone else want to do a try playing with Winston? Anyone else want to volunteer? Or did I just get rid of for one person who wanted to play?
If you want one, go.
Thank you very much. Okay, so what I want to talk about is when you put a kid on the black keys, a very common thing to happen is for what I like to call noodling. Noodling is when saying, can you play random black key notes, just play random black key notes. I feel like it's hard for him to noodle because he's done a lot of playing. But let me show you what noodling sounds like. Winston, can you stand up for a second? So this would be what noodling sounds like. Noodling is simply running scales, right? Noodling is simply running scales. So the question is, when you put a kid on the black keys, how do you go from noodling to making ideas, right? How do you go from simply playing notes to playing phrases? And this is where I think call and response is very, very important, because call and response gives kids vocabulary, gives kids phrases to use on their own. So let me give you an example. Winston, can you play this for me? Now, what this is called, I like to call this is phrasing coaching. So he just played an ascending pattern going up. Now, can you do me a favor and play me an ascending pattern going elsewhere? Play it starting here. Play 3 notes going up. Go ahead. Now play it going down. Now play it going down from here. Sort of like theme and variation, and giving kids options, and giving kids the ability to take an idea and change it and play in different places on the piano. So phrasing coaching is very important when you put kids on the black keys, because it avoids noodling or simply playing scales, and it gets them playing ideas. And coming from the place of improv is a language, we want kids using ideas and not simply playing scales, right? Because there's a really big difference. So what I like to do with kids is do lots of phrasing coaching. I'm going to have you play in a second. What I like to do is do different chord tone coaching and do different patterns to get kids playing. Chord tone coaching is very interesting because we can just talk about jazz for a second. If we talk about playing a solo over chord changes, when a jazz player plays a solo over chord changes, part of what makes his solo make sense is that specific chord tones over chords are being played in the solo in order to fit the changes. So let me show you what that sounds like. You guys can see right there. So here's Autumn Leaves, and I'll explain. If I had a more advanced student, or like a high schooler, and they were practicing Autumn Leaves, one exercise they can do for soloing is they would practice the chord tones, which would sound like this. And practicing the chord tones are very important because it helps structure the solo. Now let's rewind and go back to working with a beginner. You can introduce this concept with a beginner on a very basic level, and that is with chord tone and landing point coaching. Let me explain what that looks like. So if you have a kid on the black keys, you can ask them to highlight certain notes in their solo, similar to a jazz player when they highlight chord tones in their solo. For example, if I were to solo over Autumn Leaves and I want to highlight the root, 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 it's very, very similar. So Winston, can you play a phrase that starts on this note? Exactly. Now let's do a phrase that ends on this note. So you can coach kids to land on certain chord tones. When I was starting to get experience with piano safari, something I got hip to was these little fuzzies that you can put on the piano. And so something you can do with kids is use fuzzies or erasers or use some sort of placeholder and put it on the note that you're trying to highlight. And then the kids can try to highlight that fuzzy note in their solo. So if I were doing it with Winston, I would put it on G flat, and he can highlight the note G flat in his solo. So here's what I want you to do. Can you play a solo for me? And I want you to highlight G flat. And what I want you to do is I want you to play the band, okay? So remember, the theme is G flat, okay? Can you do me a favor and use your left hand? Sorry. As a jazz player, the boogie woogie stuff happens in the left hand, and it's going to bother me. So, okay, 1, 2, here we go. Good job, that was awesome. So you can give them different notes. Let's try a different one. Let's try to do the fifth. So if we're talking about what chord we're highlighting, we're doing boogie woogie. We're highlighting a G flat 7 chord. So already Winston is highlighting chord tones just like a blues player would in his solo. Now we'll try to highlight the fifth of the chord, D flat, okay? So now I want you to highlight this note in your solo, okay? And you can do the ostinato again, okay? 1, 2, here we go. Good job. That was awesome. Notice how his phrases are centered around that one note. Then you can start adding more and more notes. Then you can start adding more and more notes to the phrases and do phrasing coaching. So just if you think about the logical progression, you start with one note, and it could be on black keys if you'd like. You start with one note, you jam with the student on the one note, then you can put them on the black keys and start having them create their own ideas, and then do different phrasing coaching in order to get them playing their own ideas. So the interesting thing about the pentatonic, which I think was highlighted earlier in the other presentation, was that you can play and make different compositions on the black keys. And I do that a lot with kids. So we'll create a little song on the black keys. So let's try to make a song. Let's try to do this. Play it back. Try it again. So, going down, going down, going up, going down. Try it. can compose with really young kids on the black keys and get them doing different compositions. And I'll compose a blues with the kids. I'll compose it in minor. So let me have you play one more time. Can you play the blues ostinato again in the left hand? And yep, and you can play your song. Going down, going down, going up, going down. Go ahead. 1, 2, here we go. One more time. Nice job. You made a little blues. Good job. So this is a whole exploration with young kids. I had a 4-year-old 2 days ago write a song on the black keys about her cat. It's a great song. Does she remember it? I'm not sure. But she did write a lovely song on the black keys about her cat in the last lesson. And then we improvised over it. I just want to point out something quick. Thanks. Give a round of applause. So the block keys, again, are interesting because it highlights 2 different tonalities. You can do a major tonality or a minor tonality. And I like to introduce this to kids to show them the difference between major and minor. And I like to do different accompaniments to highlight both of those tonalities. So Winston, your job is just to jam out on the black keys. So you have a pretty easy job. Okay? So just jam out on the black keys. So the first one, I'm going to do a major accompaniment on the black keys. If you're curious about all these accompaniments, in the next year, I'll be releasing some materials related to this for teachers to accompany their students. You can look on my website for that. I'll be updating all that in the coming year, so you can look out for that. Okay, so let's play together, and I'll do a major accompaniment. Okay, you ready? Okay, let me start it off, and then you'll come in. Okay, you ready? So that was a major tonality. Just so you know what I was doing G flat, A flat minor, D flat minor to B. Just a word about accompanying students for black key work. When it comes to diatonic accompaniment, all the diatonic chords of G flat major work, so G flat, A flat minor, B flat minor, A major, etc., going up the scale, all work. And that's all I was doing there, was simply just going up the scale. Now let's flip it and do a lot of fun games going from minor to major. I'll ask them which one I'm doing and I'll quiz them on it, and we'll go back and forth. So here's a minor one. Here we go. Let me start it off, and then you'll come in, okay? minor. Because again, the pentatonic is either G flat major or E flat minor, and both work. The other thing that I would do with kids, and again, we're just touching upon the block keyboard. We haven't even gotten into white keys yet. We'll see if we have time for that today. But what I like to do with kids is do different styles of music. So I will show what that looks like. So Winston, I'm going to let you pick the first one. Let's do jazz, pop, or boogie woogie. Which one do you want to do? Pop. Okay, we'll do pop. I'm doing pop in a room full of mostly classical players. I'm a jazz player. No, it's okay. I was just kidding. Okay, here we go. Let me explain how I do pop. A little bit of a stereotype, but you know, that's okay. So the way I do pop is I do octaves in my left hand, and I do quarter note chords in my right hand. Ready? Okay. You want to do jazz now? You ready to do jazz? Or you want to do boogie woogie? Jazz? Okay. So how do I do jazz? So I was just talking to a piano teacher last night about coaching him on how to do this. So jazz, if you're doing it in the key of G flat, there's a difference between boogie woogie and jazz. In that jazz, you can do more of a walking bass line, and for boogie woogie, it's more of this kind of motion. The jazz, you can do a bass line. And in the right hand, you can do what's called the Charleston rhythm. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So we'll do jazz first. That was jazz. So for jazz, you can simply do 1, 3, 5, 7 in the left hand. Now, at any point, if you find yourself doing more of a blues kind of sound, like this was more of a blues, you can have your student add the note A with the black keys in the right hand to have them do more of a blues kind of sound. Why don't we try it again? And this time, can you add the note A for the blues scale? The interesting thing about the note A is that if you do it starting in G flat, it's the major blues scale. And if you do it on E flat, it's a regular blues scale. And both work over the black key pentatonic. Okay, ready to do Boogie Woogie? This is one of my favorites. Here we go. Does everyone want to come up and try to do the jazz? It'll take me 2 minutes to teach you. Does everyone want to come up and try to do the jazz? Anyone brave enough to try to do the jazz one? I promise it'll be great. Anyone? Julie's gonna try to do it. Everybody's gonna try to do it.
I don't know how to do this.
He doesn't know how to do it, which is even better. Okay. So all it is sort of for jazz is simply in the left hand. You don't have to worry about the right hand. The left hand is just 1, 3, 5, and 7 for a G flat 7 chord. Try. Now the right hand is let's just ignore that. Okay, got it. Okay, you ready, Winston? 1, 2, here we go. One more time. Good job, guys. That was awesome. Now let's try to do the Boogie Woogie. The Boogie Woogie is a little different. It goes 1, 5, 1, 6, 1, 7, 1, 6, and 1, 5. In the right hand, you can do the same thing you were doing before. Yeah. In the right hand, make sure that it's short. Let's try to do pop. So pop, you're just going to play 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 in the left hand, and then the right hand you're just going to do chord notes. Cool. Yeah, pause. So that's a whole bunch of different styles that you can do with your students. I'm going to pause for a second. Thanks, Julie. I'm going to pause just for questions, and then I'm going to show you one more thing. Does anyone have any questions just regarding improv and beginning students? Yeah.
Wonderful. How long do you start like this, and then when you go to the white keys, or how long do you spend? Or is it just part of the whole lesson?
So you mean like what's the progression from going from black keys to white keys?
Yes, or do you just combine it?
So I guess it's age dependent. So like for a 4-year-old, I'd stay on the black keys for a long time. But for Winston, I think that, so the white keys, let's talk about the white keys. The white keys, we're going to use a bike analogy. The white keys are like taking training wheels off a little bit. Because the thing about the white keys is that instead of just being the pentatonic, it's the entire diatonic scale. And the issue with the entire diatonic scale is that if I'm playing for Winston, some kids are very perceptive, and some kids can notice when you hit the fourth, or sometimes the major seventh, clash with a little bit too. And so it's more opportunity for clash notes. So for the white keys, I like to really have kids really have lots of phrases on the black keys and be comfortable with the fact of me playing, them responding, doing call and response, doing back and forth. Because the white keys are a little more intimidating because there's more chance of clashing notes, and so they have to be more comfortable with and more confident in themselves in order to switch to the white keys.
Another question. So really, you're teaching them pattern.
Correct.
To understand and hear that. And how long is it before you start teaching them reading music, or?
Well, I started reading music. Well, I mean, he was in piano safari, and he was just going along the piano safari method. So he was starting to read.
I'm just curious how long, you
Yeah, it's at the same time. I don't delay.
Oh, you don't delay it?
No,
You don't have them.
this is alongside with his normal method work.
Oh, I see, you combine the two.
Yeah, this is all supplemental. This isn't like this is his whole lesson. This is all he does. He also does like reading pieces and also
Right.
does like.
So, do you know Kids Rock program at all? You know, they
No.
do a lot of, they're in many cities in the United States where they do this ensemble playing, they play.
Sure, yeah, I'm familiar with programs like it. But yeah.
Yeah, you know, they do a lot of this. It's like, talking before you read, you know, it's wonderful, the pattern that it's getting.
So
I like to do that.
speaking of so patterns, when we think about improv being a language, Winston, do you want to take a break and go sit on the chair over there? You've been playing a lot. We can just, Thanks to all my volunteers who came up. You were awesome and you were very helpful. I really appreciate it. Thank you. So patterns. I was talking to one of my jazz pianist friends about patterns and improvisation, and I think it would be incorrect to say that improvisation is simply patterns, because it's not simply patterns. It's to call it differently. It is a language in learning vocabulary. So I'll show you an example. That blues idea kind of comes from Oscar Peterson, and I can do it in a different key. Right? So being able to take ideas and transpose them and learn them as vocabulary is the skill that we start working with kids right away, and that's why it's important with the phrasing coaching to say, okay, now on the black keys, do the pattern here, now do it going down, and do it somewhere else on the piano, now highlight this chord tone, because it gets kids thinking of the fact that you could take a pattern, you could take an idea and move it somewhere else on the piano instead of just running scales. Are there any other questions? Right.
How many years has he been playing?
Almost one, not quite. Not quite a year. Yeah. So, any other questions?
So I'm going to, this ear training which they get from this.
Yeah.
A lot of times when students just read the notes, they don't hear it. They're so busy with all the other things. But it's wonderful to do this here, because they really hear the high and low.
Yeah.
They're getting a sense of how music is put together.
So let me show you, speaking of inner ear, Winston, can you come back? Come back here? Let me sit here. Okay, so speaking of inner ear, I do a lot of drumming and a lot of voice work with my students to work on connecting their inner ear to the instrument. Keep saying that. Ready? Now saying going down. Nice job. Okay. So this is the game we play. Can you start a steady rhythm on the drum? Go ahead. Keep it going. Sing it back to me. Dun, dun, dun. 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 Okay. Nice. So the reason I do that is because then when we do some piano, here, we can move the chair up. Okay. Dun, dun, dun. Now play it. Dun, dun, dun. Dun, dun, dun. Dun, dun, dun. Dun, dun, dun. You notice how I didn't play vocal last time? Dun, dun, dun. 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 So you can work on connecting their ear to the piano by drumming and singing, and then trying to have them match on the keys. And then you can do an exercise where you sing them a pitch, and then they match it on the keys. Are you? Someone else want to ask any questions before I keep on going? Anyone else have any questions about? Okay. So this concept of connecting the voice to the instrument is very important. If you notice, I was singing the pitches to him, and then he was playing them back to me without me playing. And so this is very, very, very important for kids in order to develop their ear, because in order to avoid kids just noodling and playing scales, it's very important for them to have that sense of vocabulary. So now let's end by playing blues. You ready? Okay. First, you play what I play, okay? Now, what you can do with the kid is you can switch. They can play and you can copy them. So I'm going to copy you this time, okay? Now, we're not going to stay on the black keys, we're not going to stay on the white keys. I just want you to play whatever you want, okay? You can play whatever you want, okay? Go ahead. So let with beginners with improvisation. And thanks so much for having me. I had a really good time. And I think he did too. Thanks, give me a high five. Good job. Thank you, Winston, thank you, Linda, and the board, and thanks for coming out. I really appreciate you listening. Thanks.
Thank you.